The Ryan Jesperson Show, weekday mornings at 9 on 630 CHED.
Let's not keep our lead-off guest waiting. As mentioned, the Honorable Paul Hellyer first was elected in 1949, the federal riding of Davenport, at that point the youngest person ever elected in the Canadian House of Commons. He served under several prime ministers, including Louis St. Laurent. He was the defense minister under Lester B. Pearson, and now the longest-serving member of the Queen's Privy Council, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, our guest. First thing this morning, thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Not at all. It's my pleasure.
You know, I'm very much looking forward to your perspective on this comprehensive economic and trade agreement, otherwise known as CETA. A bunch of people celebrating it, saying this could, benefit Canada to the tune of $12 billion a year. But, Paul, you're calling it immoral and illegal. How come?
It's both. And it's those figures you just quoted were somebody's fantasy to try and make Canadians think that we were getting a good deal and that it was important. But the poor people of Wallonia, who must have had their arms twisted very, very badly, really had it right. It's not really a trade agreement. I put it as a cleverly crafted takeover agreement. And what it does is to, first of all, give the business people, the bankers, and the transnational corporations in Europe greater rights in Canada than Canadian citizens have. And I say that in principle, is wrong. Nobody from outside the country should have greater rights than we do. But the second thing is that it unilaterally changes our Constitution. And this is illegal. Under the Constitution, the Parliament of Canada has an absolute control over money and banking. And it can create money, Parliament can create money, or have the Bank of Canada create money, all the money that we need to meet the shortages in those various areas like healthcare and education and the arts and infrastructure and looking after our indigenous brothers and sisters. We can create all of that money as long as we still have that power resting with the Parliament of Canada, which it is as of today, and I hope always will be. But if we were to ratify, and no one should get too upset about the signing. I mean, our previous Prime Minister signed it too for his photo op some time ago. The signing is not the important thing. It's ratification and implementation. And the lawsuit that I and some of my friends have started against the government and the Governor General and the Minister and all the way they are worked in legal documentees is to prevent them from ratifying or implementing, because if they were successful in doing that, which is something they seem to be determined to try to do, then the Parliament of Canada would lose its exclusive rights over money and banking. And if the Parliament then tried to do what I have been suggesting, and not just me, but 40 of my colleagues really started out writing something that would provide money in large quantities for the government and people of Canada and for the provinces. And if that right was taken away, and we tried to do what we're recommending, which in my opinion has to be done for our own benefit, then European banks could sue us for tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, which means it wouldn't be worthwhile. So the stakes here are enormous. And the people of Wallonia had it right, that what we're talking about is the transfer of power from people to corporations and the big banks. That's what it's all about.
And you obviously, feel strongly about this. You referenced the constitutional challenge versus CETA that you launched with lawyer Rocco Galati just a few days ago. Just so I understand correctly, Mr. Hellyer, when you say the Parliament can create money, what are you talking about?
Exactly that. They have a total power over money, and they could print or have the Bank of Canada print all the money we need. And there's a precedent for this. See, one of the advantages or disadvantages of being old is that you have experience that goes way back. In 1938 in Canada, there were no jobs, none. 1939, the war came along. Pretty soon, everybody was working in the armed forces, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and building factories and making munitions. And we achieved a historic low of 1% unemployment. And I'm certainly not recommending that today because it would be inflationary, but we could at least, under what our group are proposing, could cut unemployment in half by 2 years, which I think would be marvelous. But then we had a system where I guess put it this way, you might say, well, where did the government of Canada get the money to do all of those things? And the answer is the Bank of Canada printed it, PRINTED, printed it, and made it available to the government of Canada in very large quantities at near zero cost. And this system not only got us out of the Great Depression and helped finance the war, but then it helped finance the post-war period as well, and the great infrastructure projects like the St. Lawrence Seaway, for example, on the Trans-Canada Highway, great new airport terminals and ports and other things, and all of that, now without borrowing the money from the banks, but from the Bank of Canada. And so we accumulated virtually no debt in doing all of that and putting in all of that infrastructure, and this in addition to setting up a very impressive Social Security system, one of the best at this time, and the envy of many. So this was the system we had until 1974, and it gave us the best 35 years of the century by far. Well, then the Bank of Canada unilaterally, without any advice from the Prime Minister or Parliament or anyone else, changed the system. They abandoned the shareholders, that's us, and started taking their orders from the Bank for International Settlements in Zurich, Switzerland, a bank which is controlled by what we call the rich elite. In other words, the banking cartel, the very top people in the whole apex of extraordinary power. And so for the intervening years, we've had to borrow in the market and went in debt in the process. And we have had to pay, we the Canadian citizens have had to pay $1.17 trillion in interest in the intervening 45 years. None of it was necessary. And we've been doing that instead of looking after all of those things that I mentioned, our health care and education and infrastructure and so on.
Mr. Hellyer, I just have 1 minute left, but we know with regards to CETA and this deal, we expect it to go through regional legislatures in Europe by tomorrow night. It'll be vetted by the other 27 European Union states. And Prime Minister says, his office does, that Mr. Trudeau's waiting for a call from EU President Donald Tusk. Chrystia Freeland, Canada's International Trade Minister, says that Canada remains ready to sign the agreement. As mentioned, you've launched this constitutional challenge. That was before, of course, Wallonia bent yesterday. Where do you expect this to go? How do you expect this to wind up? What should our perspective be? What would you say it should be moving forward?
I would say that it makes no difference to us because we anticipated the signing, which is mostly for show. It's the ratification and the implementation that we're going to ask the court to set aside and to prohibit on behalf of the Canadian people. And if the politicians won't protect the 99% of the people that they're elected by, then there's no recourse except going to the courts and seeing if they will do it for us. And I would urge everyone listening to your program this morning to write to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance and their own MP and say, we want the social contract between the government and people of Canada, which would provide money for the necessary needs, including, I think, just a little over $8 billion a year for Alberta. And we do not want either CETA or the TPP, which are not really trade agreements. That's just camouflage, because they would change our Constitution and allow foreigners to interfere with our health care and our social system and our resources and our just about everything that you can think of. And that is not what we want. We want domestic improvement in our economy. We want to have a chance to grow and for our million unemployed youth to have the same kind of opportunities that people like Paul Hellyer had when he was a young man.
Mr. Hellyer, this has been a real pleasure to catch up with you. I want to read a few comments here on our text line before I thank you for your time. Stephen says this is what Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump's been warning his country about. The globalists, powerful people, corporations are lobbying and funding politicians. Stephen says people need to wake up. MZ says this is a mind-blowing conversation. I've asked many times, why can't we just print more money? Now I know why. And this, on another front, a listener by the name of Daryl would like me to thank you for your efforts. I'm not sure if this name will mean anything to you. Your efforts on behalf of Master Corporal Ormond Savage's case, another soldier that was falsely accused. Daryl says thank you for that. What a wide-ranging career you've enjoyed. We certainly appreciate your time this morning.
And I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Blessings on everyone.
No, that is Paul Hellyer. Wow. What a career. As mentioned, he served, first of all, in 1949, the youngest person ever elected to the House of Commons, Minister of National Defense under Lester B. Pearson, Transport Minister under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, a senior minister in that cabinet, which at that time, back in 1968, was essentially equivalent to Deputy Prime Minister. So